Michael not coming? Michael's been for.
Actually, yeah, Michael, he should be arriving. Maybe we'll wait a couple minutes. Okay, welcome to the Finance and Audit Committee meeting, January 29th, 4:05. And with that, I'll call the meeting to order. And do we have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second. Okay, any additions or changes to the agenda? No? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, well, we'll start, let's see, the review and approval of the minutes of the prior meetings. We don't have any for November 20th, so we'll do that at our next meeting. Reports, we have the 2022 audit verbal report, and I'll pass it over to you, Ross. Just any update you would like to give us on the audit?
Sure. What I can advise is that the auditor BDO met with council. They presented their findings. I'm happy to report in terms of their financials. Everything was in good order, which is great. That's the bottom line. Other than a few bribes that, I'm just kidding. Everything was in good order, which is, I mean, that's the goal. So that was good to hear. As is the case with every auditor, they will always come forward with recommended adjustments to how municipalities go about doing their business. The auditor had several for Lions Bay. None of them, in my estimation, experienced particularly large or concerning. So I think overall it was successful, particularly in view of some of the challenges that occurred over 2022.
Okay.
So 2023, I expect will be a lot cleaner than 2022 was, partially because they've already reviewed most of the minutes for 2023 already. So I'm hopeful that maybe we'll get a big, deep discount on that. That's a result.
Good. Any questions for Ross?
Are you referring to the comments, so that that were made about processes of decision-making processes, that kind of
The
stuff?
management letter?
Yeah,
Yeah, so there's two pieces to the audit.
just to let you know, I'm an auditor.
So one is,
CPA.
so there you go, so yeah, so one is the financials, the other is the management letter.
Yeah.
And so it's the management letter that I'm referring to, in my experience, as I've said, regardless how great your team is, there are always improvements. And BDO's management letter identified improvements, none of them, in my estimation, particularly significant or monumental, but they will improve our practices, and that's where it sits. So,
Well, that's what we look for, right?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. You know, we constantly have to fine tune our processes.
Mhm.
You know, rules also change, and which has happened this year, as I'm sure you know. So we constantly have to evolve, and so that third party input is very valuable for that.
Okay, Maria just reminded me that we did skip the public questions and comments. So I'm just going to revert back to item number 3 on our agenda and public questions. Any questions from the gallery? No? Okay. Any questions online or comments? No? Okay.
But we'll still have an opportunity to ask questions, will we?
Yeah, this was just for the public.
Participation.
Okay, and were we able to get Joe online?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, you are, okay, Joe. Next item on the agenda is the preliminary budget. And Joe, I'm gonna pass it over to
don't have.
you and Ross, and perhaps you can just make some comments as to what you would like to ideally receive from the committee and how the committee can help you out.
Sure.
Ross, I'll pass it over to Ross first, Joe, and then you can pick up the ball. So Ross, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So, I think that in my experience with finance committees, typically the value finance committees bring to the discussion is what I would refer to as directional or aspirational, rather than the nuts and bolts. So there are some very significant decisions that have to be made, less so with the base or the core budget, though that's fairly static. And the reason I say that is unless council is minded to make any sort of shift to the established service levels, it's basically the budget's going to stay roughly consistent plus CPI. Nothing really changes. That's
Consistent to the previous items. Yeah.
right. That said, I would also argue it's incumbent on staff to look at the core budget on a line-by-line basis every year to ensure that those items that were in any given year deemed to be important one year have the same gravitas the following year. But there aren't other things that are leapfrogged in importance. So I think part of the due diligence requires that sort of exercise. But that's not where the real tough decisions are. Where the tough decisions are is with everything else. And everything else is also in the category of supplementals. I don't know if you've seen any of the supplemental materials that we provided to council or not. You've seen this stuff, so you're familiar. There's a lot of dollars and asks and trade-offs and questions of timing and implications of doing things now versus later or not at all. Those are the tough decisions that council needs input on. We can advise council from a technical perspective, but there's a political lens, there's a community appetite lens that you guys bring to the discussion that staff may not, and staff should not really be conveying that. Well, you know, we would have said this, but it's not popular in the community, so we decided not to say anything. That's not what you pay professional staff for. But this is the value you bring to the table by being able to knit all these pieces together and say, here's what we recommend council with regard to these millions of dollars in what I refer to as financial risk that need to be addressed. Council's going to need some direction. Council is not a body of expert accounting professionals or actuarials or any other such thing. So they need that input, and that's the value you bring. So with that, Joe, did you want to jump in with regard to sort of any specific direction you would hope to get or glean from this esteemed body?
Oh, sure. So again, to echo Ross's comment, I'm not quite sure what the finance committee has. From our last meeting, we provided for the committee, the whole council provided budget to actual to December and a preliminary budget. And like Ross said, the operational type stuff is just pretty normal. We've gone through line by line each item. We've gone through with department heads on any expected items that maybe differ, either down or up from the prior year. And so we've developed the budget based on input across all of the village's resources and department heads. Now, currently the base budget is that, as same as last year, to give a baseline, that represents a 6% tax increase in property taxes, 5% across the board for utilities. For property taxes, and we had this discussion last year, there's a kind of a sensitivity analysis that's included in the materials that is provided to the committee as a whole and to council. Basically a 1% tax increase, property tax increase is about $17,000. So for us continuing with a 6% tax increase, same as last year for property taxes, represents an additional $107,000 in revenue. That just kind of keeps us whole for inflation and our costs just running the village. We put a little bit away, for, infrastructure, going forward, but it doesn't really move the needle a whole lot. What I've done, polling with, local communities, we're also going through the budget processes right now. What I'm seeing right now is between 8 to 10% in a property tax increase. So that's that. And then for the utilities rate, they generally pay for themselves. There's no significant increases in the utilities operational budget. It's at 5% increase for utilities. They basically pay for themselves. Water has, it's a projection about $1,000 surplus, and then sewer and solid waste are about $15,000 underneath. So it's I guess where I'd like to, where we're fruitful primarily for council's direction is like outside of the operational budget, where I think we've got a lot of notes in the materials provided to council and committee as a whole. If you have any questions regarding operational items, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I can walk you through the reasoning or what have you. But where I generally focus the committee's attention to is like supplemental, as Ross said, mentioned, and that's primarily with respect to capital expenditures in the coming year. Our big ticket items that we're debating right now are 1.3 million for a fire truck, which in my recommendation would be funded through debt with MFA. We have we're expecting a significant capital spend on the Lions Bay Beach Park project, which is getting going this year. That is 72% grant funded. So on our side, we're looking to spend about $300,000. And then the class building of $500,000, which is 100% grant funded. And that's in the works for moving forward, which is good news. So those are the big ones. Also, there's a request from Public Works to the tune of $1 million to replace the highway tank. That's an urgent need of repair. We previously taxed for $100,000 last year towards the renovation or replacement of that highway tank, and then the ask this year is for an additional $900,000 to remediate that and replace it. Those are there's about another $2 million in water main replacement, Lions Bay floating dock, and the connected project. The connected project is about $413,000. That's transit funded as well, to the tune of 75%. So I guess really the ask on our side is for the finance committee to review the proposed capital costs in the current year and reassess or reevaluate capital priorities. We have received from the last infrastructure meeting there was 6 priorities from identified by the finance committee, and those have been included in capital requests.
If I could, I have a quick question before, I don't want to lose the context, if you don't mind. Sure. On page 45 of the long 78-page deck, I think this is for you, Joe. You've got the general fund and the proposed capital requests, and you're comparing 2023 to 2024. Just want to make sure these are both the capital requests as opposed to 23's actual spend. Is that correct?
Yeah, those are the requests. So 2023, the $2,038,000 were what were approved in the budget. 2024 are what are requested in 2024, the $6,351,000.
Got it. So it's request to request as opposed to actual to request.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. So good.
Yeah.
So it would be nice in the perfect world if that was the extent of the ask, it's bigger than that. I'm gonna dogpile here, Joe. So the analogy I'm gonna use is the funnel. So what Joe's talking about is partway down the funnel. There's a bigger discussion that I think council needs to have, and informing that discussion by your input would be valuable. These are questions like, what does financial sustainability look like for the village? We need to be looking at financial sustainability, not fooling around with the edges. There's gonna be an ugly discussion because the dollars associated with financial sustainability are large, but the discussion has to happen. It's up to council with respect to how it chooses to interface with that reality. But the discussion needs to happen, the direction needs to be given to council. Then with respect to some of the kind of necking down that funnel, some of the finer grained or more granular questions are, how much money should council be setting aside by policy for the various reserve funds? So for instance, as an example, some local governments will say, we are going to set aside whatever, pick a number, $200,000 every year, and that's going to go into the capital reserve fund for fire. That means that at the end of X number of years, we have all the money we need. For the most part, we may have to borrow or transfer or whatever, little bits of money here or there, but we are on stable footing with regard to fire truck replacement, fire hall, maintenance, replacement, yada, yada, yada. One day, that building's going to be too old. How much money has been set aside for its replacement right now? I don't know, but I bet you it's zero. Is that financial management? I'd say no. So we've got to get on stable footing. With regard to a policy of council, I would recommend that council have a policy around how much it should be setting aside for various reserve accounts to ensure that we are moving toward greater financial sustainability. Whether we get there now or later is a whole other discussion, but we at least need to be moving in that direction rather than rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Then there are more fine-grained discussions. How much should be spent from reserve accounts? How much should be borrowed? How much should be taxed? There's sort of a choreography amongst those. Right now, we're making, don't quote me on the numbers, somewhere in the order of 130,000 and change in interest. Is it better to draw that down and get zero in interest? Is it better to hobble along, getting effectively a free 130,000 change for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years that we can put towards something? You heard 1% tax increase to 17,000. So do the math. What is the math on that? That's 10% tax increase every year. So there is a tension with regard to those numbers. You guys, excuse me, I think it'd be helpful for you guys to be discussing these things and saying, you've considered all of these issues, and here council's what we think you should do. Again, council's gonna make its own decision, but that input is helpful. These supplementals that you see are sort of crudely ranked into low, medium, and high priorities based on risk, right? High probability and high risk is high. Low probability and low risk is low. It's pretty generic stuff. So that's not really the issue. It's about these larger overarching financial questions that need to be wrestled to the mat. I didn't come prepared to sort of lead you through that, and I don't know that you have all the questions in front of you or in your mind to be able to sort of, to start wrestling these things down. But
Can I just,
well, let me just finish this one sentence, and that is, it may be of value for staff to provide you with sort of a cheat sheet of key topics that would be valuable to discuss and answer for council.
All right, just so you're aware, the committee has been in possession or passed out all the information that the committee of the whole had, basically the same package. So they've had a chance to review it, and hopefully there's some comments and ideas. But that's great feedback. Joe, anything else before we turn it over to the committee?
No, I think that pretty good things from Ross. I'm looking forward to any input, and I just want to reiterate again, I'm always available for a call. Input is greatly appreciated.
Okay, Jeff?
Well, I was thinking, Joe,
Ross,
I'm sorry, Ross, the notions that you're talking about there, it didn't strike me that it's in our bailiwick to define just strategic intent. I don't think. And correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is that there's two kinds of, we can break this down into needs and wants, things we have to do. I get it, a good sense of the elephant in the room about infrastructure in our population base of about 375 households or 475 households and millions of dollars of budget. Those are problems, big problems. So it comes down to what's the appetite? What is the strategic intent? What's been laid down over the last few years? I don't have the answers to these things. It's hard to contribute, and for us to banty about and debate one off against the other, when we don't know what the wishes of the community are with regards to what the desires are of the needs versus the wants. It makes it a tall order to follow through in a 2-hour session like this. So we've got, from what I understand so far, is that we've got some deadlines to live up to coming up in March and May, I believe, for finalizing reports, submitting them, all that kind of stuff. But is this our time frame to move through all this?
Yeah.
So, yeah, we have to have there's a timeline to adopt the budget and set tax rates and so forth. But to be honest with you, a lot of this stuff doesn't necessarily require your input. We can figure it out. It may not be perfect, may make mistakes, but what's critical is this other stuff that needs to be discussed that I referred to earlier. There needs to be a bigger.
So you're not talking about the line items, individual line items. No, I get that.
That's,
Yeah.
so.
So it's the other stuff.
Yeah, so
That's-
I don't, you mentioned,
CapEx mostly, right?
pardon me?
CapEx.
I think so, yeah, because as I say, it's the conversation otherwise, as far as I can tell, is not happening. And all this stuff, the analogy I would give you is that these discussions are the foundation of what we do financially. If we don't have that foundation down,
Mhm.
if we don't know what financial sustainability looks like, if there is no discussion about whether or not we should be having a conversation in this community in year 1, year 5, year 10, about maybe amalgamating with West Van or Furry Creek or whatever in order to achieve these financial sustainability goals.
Well, that's exactly, and that speaks to strategic intent for our little village here.
Yeah.
And what is the intent? We've got a lot of long-termers here that, it just nice way the way it's been for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
And other odd spots and sods like that. So, and I'm game to help take that on. I'm just saying that that's a tall order for, we've got to be well equipped, and you're right, for a lot of these things, we don't have to be here for some of these line item decisions to be made. I get that.
And so there should be a conversation about how
But so
we equip you guys.
all of that,
And you may not be able to provide the answers in 2024, but maybe.
well, we can run financial scenarios, and if we talk about JV with
Sure.
other municipalities or that kind of stuff.
And we can support
That has to be looked at if we talk about big fat elephants. There's the frustration I heard in the first meeting, it was at before Christmas, it was around that, but nobody wanted to touch the elephant. It was just,
It's time.
yeah, and I'm in for that. I think this has to be addressed from the point of view, there's background, there's history, there's the culture of our community, there's the attitude of the community. All of this comes into play.
For sure.
And that's not, we don't have all of that at our fingertips.
No, and this is likely, be an iterative discussion. It may take 6 months,
For sure.
12 months, it may take 2 years. It takes what it takes,
But beyond
but it has to.
beyond that.
And how do you see it, what format do you see this? Is this a strategic meeting? Is this a town hall,
It's
getting
probably-
input from
Yeah, it's
all the community?
It's all of those, yes, yeah.
You know,
Council has to be absolutely inextricably connected to this. Where, when, and how is a discussion for council to have. You know, there's council will zoom in and then zoom out. Other groups will go off and do their work and then they zoom in again. So this is not a one meeting, a 5 meeting. This is a long-term
Yeah,
discussion.
and it involves all of our stakeholders and finding out what works, what doesn't work,
Yes.
what's possible, what isn't possible.
Absolutely.
And so that's a deep dive.
It's
I'm,
deep as you're
I'm
gonna
with
get.
you, I'm with you about trying to answer the questions. I'm not being I'm not opposed to that. I'm all for it, to be honest with you.
You know, and here's the thing.
It's asking the tough questions.
The bottom line is, once the discussion has happened and people understand what the data tells you, no one's a slave to it. Council can always say, well, that's all well and good, but we're not going down that road. But at least the community knows and can make an informed decision as to how it wants to deal with this herd of elephants in the room. But pretending they don't exist and, crossing their fingers and holding their breath and jumping into the finances every year is not what I would recommend this community do.
Are we in a chicken and egg situation here? There's a finance committee, there's council. Fire truck, plat, so on, you could easily come up with $5 to $6 million, just boom, there's only a certain appetite for tax increases, I would think. So, I understand. Should we be going to council and discussing what all the possible finance options are? Should we be, is council interested in borrowing money? If they're not, there's really not much point in going down that road.
And can I try to answer that? In my answer, I'm posing it as a question for you to say that I have it right or not, from your perspective. So what Ross has been talking about is a more holistic view to finance in Lions Bay. We've got a budget in front of us. This is for this year. It's finite. It's something that has a deadline on it and it's here and now. That's not what we're here for, really. What we're here for is the bigger picture.
Right.
Which is, what are we gonna do, not just long term? Because we can't fund the future the way things are right now. So we either need more revenue or less expenses or something that isn't planned. Council goes for 4 years. Next year, there'll be a different council. This decision, or these decisions are going to impact future councils because we're talking about infrastructure issues that are 10 to 15 years down the road or longer and longer. And then this whole question of, bigger questions about amalgamating or something like that, whether we use some of the land on the peripheries that we can either generate more tax revenue or even whatever kind of revenue. But to me, I got involved with this group more as a researcher, somebody that can help do research. Council's got a million things to do. They just don't have time to go deep on many of these things. It's not within their purview or the period of time with which they're elected. And they just have other things that have to get done. And they get paid about this much and they work about this much. So these things aren't going to get done unless volunteers help. And if we can get volunteers that have experience in finance, then it's obviously better. And this committee will change and such. Personally, the rigidity of what we can and can't do, we have to go into closed for some stuff, that doesn't help. But what we can do as volunteers is just add hours, smart hours, to help make recommendations to council. But it's got to be on a long-term basis. It's not just about the budget that we're going to give a little bit of input to today.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah, you got it.
And it's not dependent on what our desires are. It's what the desires.
We're just researchers and we're going to provide information to other
Yeah,
people.
I look at it that way
Take that
too.
information.
It's research running scenario analysis with regards to spare lands, with regards.
And your
to-
expertise.
Based on the
And your
expertise.
expertise.
Yeah.
And it's just another input for council to consider and deliberate on.
And definitely council needs public participation in this. This is a form of public participation, but we're supposed to have a little bit more understanding of finance and we're supposed to spend a little more time on it than most of the other people in the public. If somebody comes to a 2-hour meeting in Broughton Hall to talk about these things, they're adding a couple of hours. We're putting in more time and overtime over a period of time on that, right? One of the things that was really helpful for me on the topic of, I'm not really changing, this isn't a segue, but one of the things that was helpful in this package was the comparison of the tax increases in other municipalities. And it was actually, I think Joe rounded them up. It was actually 7.6, I think it was, and 9.5, and we're proposing 6. So if I run into somebody on the street and they say, hey, aren't you on the finance committee? How did you let us go to 6? That's a really good data point for me to throw back, is that we're actually under a lot of the other guys. Nobody likes to pay more in tax, but around here, we've got a dire issue, long-term. So understanding more about best practices in other communities is not just for tax, but for everything, about what other communities are doing for their long-term financial sustainability, is the kind of research that I think we could put our heads to, or this committee should be putting its head to, because that's the kind of thing that I really don't, I do this for my business, and I don't expect the accounting office, I'm pointing over to the staff or council, to have the time to do a good job of that. I think that's something that we can do a good job. Best practices in other areas that we can imbue in here in our village.
Yeah, if I could, so these tax increases you're seeing are a little bit higher than normal.
Of course.
Which you might see.
So
I think we're all
interest rates and inflation.
Yeah, that's largely it, but there's another, and I'm just summarizing, there's a whole bunch of different reasons, but the big moving pieces are the inflationary costs. The union contracts that are being negotiated, without getting into numbers, if I told you what the District of North Vancouver and the City of North Vancouver have just negotiated, I think you would be a little bit surprised. I've never seen anything like it in my entire career, not even half that amount. So that's another reason why you're seeing across the board these larger tax increases. And the last piece is there's an increased appetite. Let me back up. It was traditional for a lot of councils for a lot of years, over the last 40 years, for councils to kick the problems down the road. And they would celebrate 0% tax increases or 1% or 2%, nothing of any consequences. What that did is it kicked down those problems down the road for future councils. Over the last 15 years, there's, roughly speaking, there's been an increased sort of awareness and emphasis on the notion of financial sustainability. Municipalities have to, through proper asset management planning and so forth, get a functional handle on the costs to run the village. Many municipalities are way in the hole after years and years and years of financial neglect. So there's a lot of catch up. There's another small community that is in Metro that realized that, and you may recall the numbers, but their tax increases for a number of years are something like 15%. Is that roughly? Just to catch up, not to get ahead, not saving for the rainy day, just to catch up. So that's a difficult conversation for people to have, especially when you're talking about people on fixed income, seniors and so forth. That's a hard conversation to have. That conversation might ultimately translate into or manifest into some seniors not being able to live in their communities anymore because the tax increase obligations to manage the hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure improvements are going to mean that they can't afford to live there anymore. That is really screwed up. But what do?
Screws like that are all over the place.
It's true.
In all levels of society and demographics. It's happening more and more. It's true.
Yeah. So there's a lot of questions. Infill is another question. How many more residential units can be fit into line space so we can defray that tax obligation without increasing the cost of infrastructure? In other words, more taxpayers per unit of sewer, water, whatever the case may be. So these are our aspirational, directional conversations that this group, it would be very valuable for this group to start to grapple
I
with.
mean, the idea of growth sounds great, I like the idea. But when we don't have enough water to feed the people that we have, August, every year.
Don't worry about the technical details, because there are always technical solutions. In the consulting world that I once came from, there's a saying, there ain't nothing money can't fix.
So let's say there's constraints
There are
to be
big
faced.
constraints. Yeah.
You
Must be addressed.
touched on reserve funds earlier, I forget how much we have in the bank, 4.5 million or something like that, I think it was 3 something last year. Should we be trying to establish what that rainy day fund, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Necessary?
Absolute soup to nuts. What we need is a playbook, a financial playbook. We've got some of the pieces in that playbook. We have an asset management plan. I have not read it. Carl assures me that it's pretty good. I don't know if that's pretty good in air quotes or just pretty good. So we have some of the pieces in place, but do we know what we don't know? Can't tell you the answer to that. I'm too new in the role.
Well, and how far out is that lens as well?
And how far out is that lens? When does it need to be updated? Does it reflect current technologies and current prices and changing standards? I don't know. So,
Well,
yeah,
typically we look at a 5-year window, 5-year strategic plan, municipalities, we look at that. We start there. And
The
bigger
strategic plan
problems
was
can be addressed.
submitted last year, yeah, so it was a 5-year window.
Yeah, we've got a 5-year window on expenses, I think,
Mhm.
and some CapEx. But this isn't about replacing fire trucks.
Mhm.
This is about the fact that we are tens of millions, I don't even know what the number is, but we are way, way behind our ability to.
24 million.
24 million.
that's a big tax increase.
Would love to see that math. But we are way behind in the long term. In the long term. We have, kind of this kind of revenue, and somewhere down the road, we gotta pay for infrastructure that we're just not chipping away at right now.
And by the way, 24 million is 25 million next year and 26 million the year after. Give or take. So these are the aspirational, directional conversations that various levels of the community have to have, so that council has all of the inputs necessary to be the traffic cop on these issues and make decisions strategically to get us where we need to be.
So again, are you suggesting that this committee start to organize events to gather more information? Or are we looking more at a council-led program? What's your
That's
thoughts?
a good question. So, to me, again, I'm gonna use the funnel analogy. You start wide and you neck it down to the details. And I think so there's 2 pieces I think that are key. One, recognizing that the community needs to move toward a sustainable financial model, number 1. Number 2, what should it do about all of these X millions of dollars of supplementals? Some sort of directional input would be good for council. But that's not where the matter should stop. With regard to the first issue, I think that the recommendation of the committee is that council take a hard look at what to do about the long-term financial sustainability of this community, and with that in mind, direct staff or whomever to facilitate an action plan to move that discussion forward. Here's what's gonna happen. We're gonna use these people and those people at this time and that time, and these inputs and those inputs. Bit of a playbook around how we're gonna move that forward. Otherwise, it's ad hoc and all over the place. So it's that structured approach, I think, is the playbook that we need to develop. But that direction needs to come from council. Doesn't have to. I mean, you guys can take that on, but properly, it should come from council.
Through there. The Finance and Audit Committee, I think all committees are advisory committees, right? So, I mean, it would be wonderful if this committee came up with all the solutions and just provided them to council. That would be terrific. But in the meantime, it's an extra set of eyes. It's bringing some outside experience in. And I think it will really, really assist bringing to staff as well as to council, sort of we talked about attitude and culture of the community. You know, you're going to be saying what, you know, when you go to the street and say, oh yeah, what does 6% look like? This is what people are saying. You know, I think this is there's a real advantage in having more places for information to be being developed. We keep looking at, you know, how are we going to pay for this, right? We talk about taxes, we talk about using the reserves, we talk about loans, but we're not spending much time talking about grants. And I think that the size of the community that we are, we really have to aggressively look at that. And we had talked previously about having a grants funding kind of committee and some brainstorming to do with that. And I think it might be a really wise idea to, as we move forward, to pursue that as well. I don't think that would be an aspect of this committee, certainly, but it's something that this committee might want to recommend that we pursue more vigorously. Because, you know, we're going into an election year. I think certainly there's lots of issues around fire issues. Fire Smart will be driving, hopefully creating some funding perhaps for the fire truck. Our fire department is very well trained in wildfires. You know, what are the opportunities there? So I just think that we need to really look at that kind of fourth option, which is really a key option for this community, because we're just too small for anything else. We can only borrow so much money. We only have so much in revenue, and we can only raise taxes so much.
If it goes. So, you know, here's another issue I've seen affect a lot of committees, both from the public side as well as the consultant side. And that is local governments, especially at the political community level, it's a little bit like the kid at the candy shop. Lots of good ideas. Let's just do that. Let's just do that. Let's just do that. Let's just do that. And before you know it, communities have taken on way more things than they have the capacity to take on, because each of one of those things independently it seems bite-sized, but collectively, it becomes untenable. But it's hard to say no to some of these things that are laudable initiatives. And I have a feeling that might be the case with Lions Bay, that there are way more things that people that are pet projects and key interests of residents in the community that lead to
We're at capacity.
obligations. Right? Some things that don't lead to any obligations, other things do. So I think that needs to be a part of the discussion as well with regard to managing the resources that we have efficiently. You know, what is core and what is nice to have? Where should the focus be relative to the tax dollar, and where should there be less emphasis? Even with grants, there's a lot of work that goes with grants. It's quote unquote free money, but it takes a grant writer, it takes a project manager to manage it. Joe gets involved and has to do all that financial reporting. It's not just simply, thanks for the check, see you next year. There's a lot of work that goes with that. So the question is, if we are going to, for instance, pursue all these grants, who's going to write them? Who's going to do all this other things? Does Joe have to put down the tools on other things in order to be the grant manager?
Is there a grants committee?
I don't think so.
We talked about it. We haven't implemented that yet.
Well, I would think a grants committee would be a subset to the finance committee, to be honest with you. And I pursued grants. I've applied for grants in the past, various organizations, not-for-profits. It is a full-time job. It can be.
Well, Burnaby, they have full-time people.
So the question is, you know, are we milking what is out there for us to take at this point? I don't know the answer to that. I haven't looked into it in any depth, but it clearly has to be a study and a part of our financing committee, as far as I'm concerned. It's an integral part of that.
Well, here's another question for the group. Relative to the demands in this community to run the community, and in consideration of the direction the community hopes to go aspirationally, do we have the right complement of staff, the right scope of expertise, the right number of people? The answer may be yes. The answer may be no. The answer may be, well, we need to add this, subtract that. Who's having that conversation? So you're not gonna see at a staff level, people saying, man, we need to, especially at budget time, we need to hire a project manager. What's the appetite for that relative to, and we also need a new fire truck, yada, yada. So there's a big chicken and egg question that I think is also a valuable piece of this highly iterated discussion.
I like to rethink the chicken and the egg. I look at that as the propensity of humans to just want to fix things. To jump in and fix it. And it, quite often that it's going to end up breaking again. If we pursue and chase this strategic intent, like what you're alluding to, that we're taking all of this stuff into consideration, the question about this tech guy over here, and all of this is being addressed through that process.
I agree.
It's a big process.
Big.
It's not a little thing. So, you know, if we've got, you ask about the right people, well, it takes the right people to organize. And I'm not sure that it would be no disrespect to the politicians in the crowd, but because it's constantly moving through, right? But there's the strategic intent is formed by what's the desire of the inhabitants, the key stakeholders. That's the people that live here.
To hit the pause button up there, people don't know what they don't know. So that statement works only when people are empowered and given the information, given the tools, given access to information that allows them to articulate what they want.
Well, we don't operate in a vacuum, though.
Every community does, because the community doesn't have access.
So if we're being assertive and proactive in it, we'll ask the questions, the right questions in the right places, and get people to think about it. That's all part of the process.
It sure is.
To drive engagement, right?
That's the key, is right there, and making sure you have an empowered population so that when you reach out to them, say, what do you think about this? That we've taken the time to make sure that they are tooled up to be able to weigh in, rather than saying, well, God, I don't know, how the hell am I supposed to come?
And they understand the consequences.
And they understand, oh, that's the key right there.
So should we be measuring each of these projects, if any nature, not only in terms of the dollars required, but what the staff input is likely to be?
Everything.
That could be actually a standard part of the process, and this is gonna require 400 hours of staff. I'm not sure how you measure that, but
Well, you're gonna spitball it, right? You're gonna sort of get a general feel for these things relative to other priorities. They are sort of crudely ranked already. But there are other lenses that may change that ranking, as I've
I'm
said.
sure we've all done that in our own personal business lives, but
Sure.
then we were dealing with environment, at least in my case, that I was familiar with, like, this has to be done. I have a sense what that's about, but if someone says we want to build a trail or something, I have no idea whether that's 20 hours or 100 hours of staff time,
And that's just one component.
Yeah.
I mean, but there are many in terms of managing that whole basket of financial asks.
But
How best to.
But every
do it.
time there's a capital project or a project, we should also be trying to gauge at that time our resource capability.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, for sure. Yep, the resource capability, where the base or the core budget's sitting. I mean, if the core budget is sitting at 25% tax increase, you're probably gonna recommend to council that they substantially pare down the asks around supplementals. If, and the corollary of that is true as well. So these are sort of tactical decisions that have lots of input that council, I think, would value these inputs on. Somebody that's, brought their experience and knowledge to bear on some of these big, hairy, audacious issues.
So after having said all that, our job tonight is to come to some type of scope and understanding as to what the mandate is, what the appetite is for politically. And I'm with you, there's not-for-profits, governments that turn their back on the bad news and the ugly and live in the this is a beautiful place kind of place, and we've got to flesh all that out.
So you have a short-term task and a long-term opportunity. Short-term
To
task
get the ball rolling.
is primarily this question around what are your recommendations around these big supplementals menu? What should we do? What should we focus on? Well, what should council be considering? And then the other is, you want to recommend anything to council about the bigger picture, that they should do something, and if so, what? What's your recommendation? And your chair is your point person with regard to all of those questions.
Okay,
The answers to all those that you were talking about, the near-term investment things are, I mean, that's just kind of the stuff that oils the road for the longer picture.
I do have a magic 8 ball that I could bring to. If that might help.
Imagine.
Not really.
You never behind it, so how that works.
all right. I don't think we're gonna come up with all the answers here this evening, obviously.
You would be
So,
remarkable.
This has been good though, to hear from you and to give us a little bit more direction and idea of what you could use and what council you could use. You've given us a lot of background and shared your experience, so that's great. I keep coming back to how do we engage the community, because I think as Jeff mentioned, the community is not always engaged and maybe not, well, you mentioned not aware of the different aspects and everyone's busy in their lives, so we're gonna have to come up with a format or
A plan,
a
tactical
plan to engage people a little bit
Well,
more.
the whole thing, how do you go from point A to point B? What's the plan to get there? So that's how to engage, when to engage, who to engage, what are the key decision points? What are the KPIs you're looking for with regard to some of these financial decisions?
So is this the OCP or is this?
No, this is just what I would simply refer to it as is the Village Alliance Bay the financial sustainability plan.
Mhm.
But it should actually be considered in the OCP somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, this is, I would say, here's the reality. OCP is a policy document. It has no legal force and effect. You don't have to do anything with OCP. You can't do anything that's against the OCP. But no local government is required to do anything with OCP. And if I took everyone's OCP away and I hid it in my closet, do you think Burnaby Council or Richmond Council would go, oh shit, well, there's nothing we can do here today. Sorry, council meeting's over. Bottom line is everyone sort of knows what needs to be done, and most communities don't ever open their OCPs.
But it is a document that addresses future needs. They might not have, well, it might be superficial and like very basic in its intent. I mean,
It's not
Look
gonna
at
be.
Vancouver's 5-year strategic plan. I was involved with an initiative there at the main rec center where a subgroup came up with a redevelopment concept for around the main rec area. And when they asked me, appointed as the president of one of the stakeholder groups, I was prepared. I had a 5-year strategic plan. I said, well, I'm sorry, but what you've developed here doesn't correlate with this 5-year strategic plan at all. It's been, there's 2 agendas here. One is there's development, commercial development, and the other is hockey. For all things we're talking about recreation. And it was absurd what they came up with. And months after, the president of that organization came to me and apologized for where they went with this thing, and it just didn't fit. So when you say, is this the OCP? Well, it is a strategic plan that is helping map out the survivability that you alluded to of our community here for the long haul.
So being the author of many OCPs and communities across Western Canada, I would tell you,
Well, we don't have to call it that. I'm saying what we're doing is akin to that, though.
oh, I see.
Yeah,
Completely agree.
I think what you're saying is you want a plan.
well, it has to be applied, otherwise we don't, the community doesn't make it under the terms that it's operating under. That's what's been insinuated here. And I think a lot of people on the table know that what the numbers are.
Yeah, I think you need that plan as a waypoint that's way out there
Mhm.
that helps people understand, okay, we've got to get there at some point.
Yeah,
And I think the OCP should align with that among all the other things, regardless if there's nothing there's no teeth in it. But, you know, over the long term, the community needs some research. And I think that's where we can really help.
Here's another piece. Your OCP may not help you. You may have some, I don't know. Your
Well,
OCP.
sure, we can have the
But
majority of people saying they don't want to fix the future.
Well, I don't
because
mean that. I mean, don't, to the extent your OCP can inform certain aspects of the discussion, great. But don't let it hamstring the discussion. The OCP policy X says we can't, or we can't. Don't let that hamstring you. You know, what I would recommend strongly is you say, here is our endpoint. We're going to Maui. We'll figure out how we're gonna get there. We're gonna figure out which of the suitcases we're gonna pack. I'm gonna pick out which Speedo I'm gonna bring. Okay, I don't have.
I'm going on a boat, by the way.
I'm gonna sail there, right?
Yeah.
Right, so, you know, if I said, well, you know, I know the gas prices have gone up, you can't say, well, forget it, the trip's off, because I don't know what that's gonna be to my airfare. Don't worry about the technical details, don't worry about if the OCP aligns or doesn't align. To the extent that it aligns, maybe that's a good thing, to the extent it doesn't, maybe that's another conversation for the community to have, because it's going to include information that was not available at the time, was first discussed, and that led to outcome X. Now with this new information, people may say, well, all these folks, that totally changes things. Let's turn right on this instead of turning left. So
Yeah.
use it as sort of somewhat of a navigational point, not a sort of skill jacket. Would be my suggestion.
Okay, so
So we're
we're
looking
now,
for some big answers here.
yeah,
Yeah,
this is.
and this is gonna take engagement.
Yep,
Yeah.
So,
and a tactical approach. It's not, cannot be ad hoc if you want to succeed. Yeah, it's
and
measured,
from your experience, how have you seen this process unfold?
painful. It's painful, it's long, it's arduous,
Divisiveness.
divisive. You know, you said this, no, you didn't, yes, I did, back then, no, oh, it's a mess, but once, if it's well facilitated, there's, without getting too technical, there's a curve of acceptance that's associated with human beings. Once you get past this section of the curve where it's all of the messiness, and everyone then starts to move into lockstep, that's when it smooths out. It's that last 1/3 of the process.
Who leads this process? Is this a
Ultimately-
outside consultant or?
Well, ultimately, it's council that leads the process, like an orchestra conductor. Council doesn't play any of the instruments.
Well, they would approve it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't play any of
But
the.
council's not, yeah, exactly.
But they say, here's where we're going. Tell us, you know, tell us how we're gonna get there. So horn section, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I like to look at the overall process from a little bit different slant. What we're being asked to look at and do is to look into the future and provide answers and eliminate risk. And every step along the way, pardon me?
Reduce, not eliminate.
Well, to the best of our ability, reduce, eliminate, whatever it is. And that can mean painful things and ugly things to different people, right? And involved in all this are the stakeholder groups that we have to deal with. There's the council, there's the employees at council, there's our workers, there's our residents, there's our neighbors in the north and south, there's the Department of Highways. These are all stakeholder groups that we'll touch on for various things. And we have to build business case after business case after business case to sell what it is that we have to sell to move from A to B, which is achieving what we set out to do strategically. And it's the process, the whole process is about eliminating risk for the stakeholders as we move down this path. And that can be a beautiful thing. I'm not going to describe it the same way you did. No difference implied or anything. It's just when I work through these, it can be a thing of beauty and it's hard.
Have you done this before, Jeff? This
Well,
process?
a good example I could use right now is the city of Vancouver. I was doing strategic planning in their midst for about 8 years, and worked with all their department heads, the chief of police had came in, or one of his designated people, fire department, engineering, parks and rec. You know, and all sorts of groups, 18 or 20 different groups when they meet in one room. To get them to move, how they move through the strategic process and come together as an
How did
organization.
you initiate that process?
We called in meetings, we met 3 times a year. Brought everybody together for 3 or 4 days and sorted all the wheat from the chaff.
Did
And
the
set
council
them up.
give you your marching orders or set of goals? Or?
The council was aware of it, but this came down from administration. All of this happened. It spanned the 2010 Olympics. If you want to talk about ugly, the 2010 Olympics, it turned Vancouver City into a cesspool at their city hall. The politicians were making promises that the administration couldn't keep up to. Changing gears, directions in various places. Engineering was up in arms because they changed the route from this to this. And it was a bit of a dog.
So were you working closer with the staff then than you were the politicians, or how was that?
No, the administrative staff, the head of chief of police and the fire department and engineering, the top people, each one, and then they'd go back into their organization and work with their group. A corporate group that I worked with for 7 years, Husky Energy. 17 vice presidents there, and the CEO at the time and the CFO who wanted to drive a what can I say? Yeah, it had a lot of what I would call negative competition in the organization. It's high capex. Everybody wants more dollars. They don't deserve more dollars. So it was around working with all 17 of the VPs to get them to see how they contribute to the big picture of what this organization is.
Right.
Six
So
years of
with
working.
Lions of Bay being a much smaller organization, how would you orchestrate that in conjunction with Ross and staff if you were leading that process?
We get our group of key people together, key stakeholders, identify them, start to move through the process of what are the possibilities. We know that what some of the risks are down the road that we want to address. How do we keep the ship afloat as we're moving through that period of time with all these supplementals? How do we investigate various revenue streams or partnerships or drive more commercial? It's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any ideas for Jeff, if Jeff were leading this process?
Well, the bottom line is you're gonna need to look. I go back to what I said earlier, there needs to be a tactical plan that sets up exactly how you're gonna go from where we are to where we. Yeah. That has to be sort of directed by council. It's critical that, council launches this and council are the champions behind this. I think one of the greatest things that council could achieve, any council could achieve, is the goal of, it's just being called quasi-financial sustainability. That's a game changer for a community. Any council that achieves that is one to be lauded. But all of these things, these supplement, these add-on tools, these things like the asset management inputs and so forth, all inform what that financial sustainability target is. You gotta figure out what that is. How much money do we need to bring in every year in order to, say, over a 10-year period, ensure that we are taking care of everything, putting aside what we need to. When this building needs to be replaced, we have money in the kitty, but on and on and on. So once we use all of these supporting documents to figure out what that end goal is, we need to get here, then you work backwards. Figure out what do we have to do, what are the key decision points, what initiatives, hires, spends, investments, you name it. have to be made every year going forward in order to get us to that financial goal. That's your tactical plan.
Okay, so you're recommending this committee,
Advise.
make some recommendations and advises council accordingly on that sort of a framework.
To
And
me,
that would be more valuable
well, I think it's both.
as a committee
I think
than
it's both.
diving into the lineup.
No, you got your supplementals that you need to, I think council would gain value benefit from with regard to what should be the priorities. But that's one piece. The other piece is, you know, if I were sitting on a committee, I would say, here's my motion. I'm gonna say something like the Village of Lions Bay is standing on an insecure financial footing that represents a significant liability. We don't know when or what might occur before we have a financial catastrophe. We don't know if part of the hillside slips away, we lose all our water. Now that's a $50 million fix. We don't know. I wouldn't add that into the resolution.
Well, the whole village could end up in the.
Which case we don't have them solved. Have them solved.
But I would say, so in view of that significance, that council would be well advised to initiate a process to investigate how the village can move toward greater financial sustainability.
Well, that's where you set the vision and the mission out there, and that's what you want to work towards.
Yeah.
And from that comes all of the analysis down below and you know, when you're doing pro and con analysis about various possibilities that to rate them and judge them and come to the right answers, and that's all part of building the business case, right?
Yeah.
And you build a case such that the stakeholders on the other side of the table, oh yeah, no, that'll work for us. And you're getting buy-in, and it's a constant flow of buy-in, and you're not making it irrespective of them. You're getting, well, so Mr. Stakeholder, what do you see? What do you think? How can you help? What resources can you give? You know, like it's really a collaborative thing that we're talking about. It can be ugly. So as a practicing accountant, I've got a little thing on my wall: discover the raw, gut-wrenching drama of human conflict through accounting. So you got to be part shrink, but you know it's very true. I'm dealing with what is closest to a person's heart, and that's their pocketbook that they sit on from here down to here, and you know you got to get buy-in. You can't just got to sell the stakeholders.
And you've got to,
That's part of the strategic plan. So
absolutely, you can't, there's a saying that goes, you can't boil the ocean, but you can boil a teaspoon at a time. So if you translate that into English,
Sure.
you know, the process will be defined by big chunks of information. And as you move through the process, it gets finer grained and finer grained and finer grained.
absolutely,
And you map that out.
no stones unturned. Yeah.
So
Okay, lots to think about. Anything further from the group?
Well, I think there's still the notion of the budgets, the timeframes for the spring. I think it's important that we meet all the timeframes for everything. And it goes through the proper channels and is adequately disclosed to the community and this and that. And we, you know, we play the game straight up and keep things marching.
So that process is underway, and as Ross and Joe laid out timeline, so that'll continue. And I think with our discussion here, maybe we can give it some thought and start to consider some recommendations. And this process is going to march forward here over the weeks and months ahead.
If you, I don't know if so does the council want on some of these supplementals? Do you want feedback on some?
Sure. Love feedback.
I mean, I used to be in the fire department here. I was lucky enough to be in the fire department when we got a new truck.
wait a minute, I ain't sense bias here. We need more fire trucks. We need two.
I used to get his wife sandwiches for us when we had, I don't know if you remember when we had the hurricane force winds and Stanley Park was blown away. We had our trees down and I was coming home from, I did a strategic planning thing on a golf course way down in South Vancouver. And coming back home, going in was a waterfall coming up the mountain. But coming home, I ran into a road pocket at Horseshoe Bay. The upper road wasn't built yet. The RCMP were there. And so what's going on? He said, oh, we got line trees down going on the highway. We got trees down in Lions Bay. And really? I said, well, I'm a member of the fire department. I gotta get them. He said, well, okay. So he took me back here. I said I'd be on the truck all week, and we were on our fire truck all week. And your wife is making the sandwiches for us.
Yeah, there's a hand up there.
Oh,
Is it?
okay.
Anyway, just a little bit of reminiscing.
Yeah, no, that's good. Do we want to give any input this evening? We don't want this to go on all night. Or would you like to ask any more questions, consider what we've got in front of us here? How would you like to proceed?
I have a couple of questions, literally three, I think, that are not in the CapEx. I mean, the CapEx is a lot fuzzier really, but I'd just like an understanding as to some increases that are not 10 or 20%, they're like 500%. So this can be a high level answer as to a direction that I suppose staff is suggesting council approve. I think that's the right way to put it. So I'd just like to get an idea as to why we've got some increases here.
Joe's your guy on that.
Okay. So
I'm here.
I can be fairly succinct, I think.
Should I step back?
There's a section 9.
Just like here.
Can you hear me okay, Joe?
Yeah, I got it.
There's a section 9 for salaries and benefits. I can,
What page is that?
let me see. So I've cut and pasted to my notes out of the document. But it's section 9 in salaries and benefits. I don't know which fund this is, I'm sorry. It could be general fund. But what I'm looking at is a 2023 actual of 121,000 and a 2023 budget of 153 and a 2024 budget of 162. So the budget for 2023 wasn't close to filled, and yet we increased it yet again for, you know what? That's not material enough. Let me go to something else here. This is in the general fund public works. Pardon me. Under maintenance, pardon me, in maintenance in 2021, we about 250. 2022 goes to 380. 2023 goes to 730. Are you with me?
Yeah.
And then in the budget, we're we're down actually to 586. But these are wild swings. What happened with maintenance in 2023 that makes you feel comfortable that 586 in 2024 is the right number?
So I work closely with Carl, public works manager, and so what the anomaly in 2023 was for overruns on the Bayview Bridge project rehabilitation. So I've got that broken out in note 5 to that public works document. So there's a Bayview Bridge, there was a $289,000 spent in 2023. It was budgeted at 195, and then clean up in 2024. There's going to be some more, or there's additional costs associated with bridge servicing. Oh yeah, 2024 is bridge joint. And then the other part was that we didn't. We spent $331,000 on roads, road paving in 2023. We'd only budgeted $20,000 for that. I spoke with the public works expenditure for the 2024 budget, and there was not an anticipation or appetite for a significant additional road paving project. So that accounted for the significant difference.
So it wasn't in the budget, but we paved the roads anyway. That doesn't sound right.
So what ended up happening was we got a free money from nowhere. We got $998,000 from the government as a grant. And there was a debate last year if we're going to spend it on a fire truck or on public works related issues. And the consensus was that we'll do the roads. And so that's where the money came from.
Okay, got it. Got it, thanks.
Joe, with respect to the bridge, wasn't that a situation where there was perhaps, and I don't know how competitive the bidding was on this, but we hired the wrong subcontractor to do the bridge?
That would be a better question for Mr. Burr. He's got the history on that specifically. What I would say from my understanding of the situation and speaking with the former public works manager and I, is that there was significant delays in execution of the project, and there was a significant cost escalation from what it was originally budgeted for or footed for. As for the exact reasons for delay, I can provide you with a more succinct answer, but I don't have that on the back of my hand right now.
Okay, thanks.
I had questions about the professional fees for waterworks, but I can see your notes there about all these additional, I'm talking about the section 7 in professional fees and contracts. And you've got hydrology, I don't know if you pronounce that chub or cub, intakes, rock scaling, metal content. These are all budgeted for 2023 and not spent. Am I reading that right?
So yeah, you're looking at 7 in public work?
Yes.
Yeah, so these are supplementals for 2024. So hydrant maintenance, timber replacement, line safety park tree work, what have you. These are all supplemental to you for the current year, not these budget.
All right. Those are really the only things that really jumped out at me that are beyond the just the bigger discussion on the CapEx.
If I could,
Yeah, and Carl, so I sat down with Carl to properly organize and explain or provide information or background for the additional items here. So that's why you have in front of you some real breakdown of what the supplementals are. Always have to have or to organize a call with Carl to get, if you want a more deeper understanding of what they're asked, the reason why, so that you know if you just facilitate your understanding of the gap.
Ross?
thank you. So there's a supplemental that is I've introduced to Joe that council has not seen. This was late last week. And it is with regard to security systems. So under the cone of silence, to the extent that that can happen, none of our buildings have security. So anyone can break in easily enough and steal anything they want, all of our computers. And we're at significant risk. So one of the asks of council is that they set aside some money to ensure that at least the hall has a security system. But other facilities also need security systems. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. There's going to be a problem. And so that's not on the supplementals that you have in your book. Council has not yet seen this, but this is a matter that's going to be brought forward to council for their discussion.
So you said,
I would just add on to Ross's comment there as far as security. When I first started back in March, my first question was, okay, well, I got to use the office. What's the security code? And the answer was there is no security alarm system. Not only from a staff perspective where we have a button to get a panic alarm, but it only buzzes inside the office. It's like kind of like an alert. If there is an intrusion, it's not the RCMP or 911 or anything. The other concern I have is that we have a number of keys and we don't know where they all went. So we found people that are in Browton Hall, with keys that they either taken or copied. And there's just a security risk that, I am concerned about. And we are custodians and we're responsible for a lot of personal and confidential information. And I would strongly recommend that we budget for a proper security system to protect the information and the property of the village residents.
Can I ask a question? We talked about a bridge that's gone significantly over budget. Do we have a formalized tender process as a village in terms of,
Yeah. This is a short answer.
and was it tendered?
I'm not sure I was part of that.
That's a big story, man. That whole thing, I think, went back and forth and stuff, and I don't know the details, but.
I have to ask myself if it was tendered and somebody signed a fixed price contract, and if they didn't have a fixed price contract, then it tells me we don't have a process.
We do.
Yeah, but it's changed too, right? Can we dig into this a little bit, just the process, not the bridge in particular?
Yeah.
Because we used to be part of BC, whatever it's called, the BC bid process.
We still are.
And we weren't for a while.
Well, we have to be, there's a legal responsibility to advertise. Excuse me. Projects over a certain amount. So our purchasing policy sets all this out. And the two trade agreements also specify what our obligations are. So that our purchasing policy is informed by the trade agreements. So this was something that was recently adopted by council, so it's up to date, if you will. I'm not gonna say we used it with the Clap building with certainty, because I'm not sure. But we will be using that process
Okay.
for the beach park.
It's in place going forward.
Yeah.
There was a period in the last, it's actually what got me looking in when I saw that it wasn't being used in the last council.
Yeah, let me clarify. Just because it wasn't being used doesn't mean they weren't supposed to use it. I wasn't here, but
Well, we were using it. I could look up anybody who had bid, what their bid was and who won, and what their bid was, how much they won it for. There was a period of time and there were some projects completed where I couldn't find that because it didn't go through that process.
that also should not be available to the public. Bid prices, that's,
No, I wasn't asking for, well, bid prices are, if you go to BC bid, you can see what everybody bid.
well, you shouldn't, because that could be,
Not during the bid, after the bid
I know.
closed.
but that there can be, that can be sensitive information for the proprietor.
Understood.
So that's curious. I mean, normally, so I've come from the private sector and we guarded that stuff
Okay.
religiously. So my normal practice would not to be disclosed, not to disclose any information around the bid, other than who won the bid and the amount.
Okay.
But
I
none
think
of-
I even took screen shares of who bid, how much they bid. And going back into the previous bid for that particular project, but don't want to go too deep on that right now. If we're back onto the BC bid program, then that's, I think,
for certain things, over a certain amount, over requirements.
yeah, it's just okay.
Thresholds.
All right.
All right, any other questions?
A note about that bridge.
Yeah.
It was only half a block away from me. I thought they were bringing in the Brooklyn Bridge for crying out loud. For the project.
It's a story.
Yeah.
I've got a question about grants. And what is our position on grants? Who does it? How are we getting everything we should be getting? How do we control that? For the grants that are available?
Staff looks after that.
Yep.
Ross, I'll pass over to you.
Sure, thanks. So there are different sorts of grants. There are the ones, the sort of annual grants that, or funding mechanisms that come from the federal government or the provincial government, or from the federal government to the provincial government to municipalities. And then there are all these other grants, PC Hydro grants, this grant, Translate grant, you name it. there are different ways that this stuff comes to fruition. Staff either hears about a grant, and gets emails on it, or staff are looking at undertaking a project and start searching around to see if there are any grants that fit. Very time consuming, but that's another tool. I can tell you, we certainly don't say, okay, here's the full set of grants. There's probably at any given time, maybe 50 or 60 on random guess. We don't simply tell that. There's no way we could do all the projects. We lucky if we can do 10. Lucky if we can do 10. So we don't submit on all grants. We are very strategic with regard
Yeah,
to.
it was just a question about where would you rate us with respect to the grants that are out there that we have knowledge of, and we can say yay or nay to that particular grant? Are we in control of that?
Yeah, to a reasonable degree relative to the size of the organization and so forth. It's one thing to have grants out there, it's another thing to be successful. Joe, you may have some info on that one grant that we were hopeful to get. There's a big grant for some infrastructure project. I think it's worthwhile.
We were denied that one.
Do you remember what that was for?
That was the DWIP project for water main remediation of $2.7 million. But it's a little ad hoc. To Ross's point, is where we as staff identify, or a member of a committee or the council identifies the grant opportunity, we are usually as staff directed to follow up with that. Generally, the grants that we do apply for require a significant amount of input from public works. We're generally looking after either a small grant for survey and design, followed up by a larger grant for infrastructure. Again, for one example, like for the fire department, our fire chief has worked with a consulting group to pursue UBC on grants at the tune of $200,000. And our cost to the taxpayer is $800. And basically how they get money or self-funded is that we're getting a emergency program coordinator subsidized by that grant. So that's how they make their money. It really comes from all over the place. We don't have a specified grant coordinator.
Other than that said, it's important to know that Joe is the guy who is responsible for ensuring that the terms and conditions of the grants are complied with. He is as a finance guy, the buck stops with him, so he has to make sure all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted. Grant management. And
when we do apply for grants, there is a request for a petition from council with the details of the grant and whether or not we should apply for it or not, depending on the time cost or what the appetite is for that. Yeah, we do what we can.
What was the most recent grant we received one that you applied for, I think?
Yeah, we received a grant up to, we're still trying to negotiate the final upset amount, but it's up to 25,000 from the LGMA, which is funded through the CM given LGMA this money.
That's 100%.
100%. So that was, I don't know, was that 2 weeks ago?
Carl also negotiated the Pride Trail grant as $70,000, 100% funded a grant to rehabilitate the project.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Michael, any questions?
Well, just in terms of grants, how much, I mean, when I went to the UBCM, there was workshops on various grants that were available and that type of thing, which was very helpful, and I brought that information. Once the grant is put in, how much push needs to happen after that? I guess, how much political involvement is involved in those?
Zero.
Okay.
What I can tell you is with little grants, anybody can write them. But when we start getting into the big grants, $1 million, 500, 600, 700,000, multi-millions. We don't do this as far as I know, but what would be wise is to hire a professional grant writer to write these things to a level that optimizes our chances of success. You can't have somebody who's is not particularly fluid with what's required to write a grant.
I want to make sure it lines up when it comes in.
The more the money, the greater the sophistication. Because of course, organizations like the Burnaby's and so forth, they have people on staff whose job it is to write grants. We don't have that.
Do any of those do it on a contingency basis?
Absolutely. Well, not a contingency, no, is a short answer. They do it on either an hourly or a fixed. Do people do it for a job? Yes.
Yeah, and in my industry, it's all contingency.
So that's a good way to go.
Could you do that?
I think the grant conditions might preclude that. But there's many ways to skin the cat.
We're looking into it.
Absolutely. Sort of. Guess what? All right, we did it.
There's a camera here.
Who knows what that means?
And he actually knows the camera's under them.
You're right.
I'm below glass level.
It's a dance for me.
All right, lots to think about tonight. In the spirit of time, any other questions
I got a quick
on the
question.
package here?
Yeah, a quick question is just regarding the fire department. How, if any, is the fire department reimbursed or paid or anything else by whether it's the highways department or whichever one, for all the work they do on the highway to save lives and such? I see a jaws of life in the capital.
The fire department will, if there's work on the highway, or, provincial land, not ours, they'll submit a PEP report and get reimbursed for the time and cost for each individual involved and the cost of getting there in their vehicle. So we receive revenue for that. That's how they submitted. We submit claims on a regular basis. That being said, they're very long in paying us. I believe that they've only cost us up to August of last year. So we've got some receivables.
Do you know what roughly that amounts to on an annual basis?
I don't have it right in front of me. If I had to ballpark it, I'd say about $40,000.
About 40,000.
Now, the firemen are paid out on a biannual basis. That seemed extraordinary to me. That the stuff should be more frequently than that. That's maybe a side conversation.
Okay. Just, see this $30,000 jaws of life in there and wondering, are that revenue is able to be allocated to things like jaws of life? Or is there?
Well, those jaws of life are utilized for opening the beer bottles. So it's really rather important to have those in there. I'm not sure how the fire chief sort of moves his financial chess pieces around the board. I suspect capital assets like jaws of life, turnout gear and so forth are going to be all supplementals. Jaws of life are not a functional part of, I shouldn't say that, let me try that differently. They're not a regular part of firefighting on the part of homes. You don't need a jaws of life when the house is on fire. So specifically in relation to those highway incidents.
I think 80% of our call-outs were
Yeah.
MBAs.
I think in the past, though, some of the equipment has been grant funded from interesting places.
Yeah.
Support groups. I can't remember. One of them, I think, was even the Squamish group, because they recognized how many Squamish residents would benefit. So I think there's some very creative ways to fund some of this stuff.
I thought it was interesting in the package that we're talking about. They're looking for $50,000 the fire department to fund volunteers, housing costs in the village. It seems to me there's serious tax ramifications to doing that, and if we go that road, I hope we get, the accounting expertise necessary to decide whether that's in fact income to these people or not.
Mhm.
Wasn't that
I
associated with
I
300?
can't speak to that, so, I sat down with our fire chief, that was a supplemental request. It's not included in the current budget. It's included in the budget supplement, as something for Canadian council, to digest and develop an appetite for or for not. So currently, the budget does not include that amount. And it's just there for information purposes, basically as an app from the fire department, in order for them to be able to increase participation by volunteer firefighters.
I think it identifies the issue that we're short-staffed of volunteers. We're seeking ways to find, to support getting volunteers and getting volunteer housing. I think it speaks to a whole bunch of questions. So,
It's not, I'm not suggesting it's a bad idea, I just want to make sure we're
no,
following the appropriate tax
Yeah.
requirements.
I think that's,
I suspect we would be if it ever got to that stage.
We talked about the $300 to $500 a month supplement.
That's correct, yeah.
Taxable benefit.
Yeah.
right. Yeah, there's all sorts of implications.
Okay,
Sure.
any other comments, before we, take a recess and adjourn the open portion?
No.
None? Okay, motion to adjourn the open,
So moved.
second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, carried.
Okay.
Okay, we'll have a little recess, just a wash and break, and then, we'll move into closed, and
committee on that.
I think primarily it's just provided for information, and if you have input or specialized set of experience that could help toward the decision,
Okay,
we're just reaching out for any information.
okay, well, that's, I can live up to that, Joe, thanks.
You can reach out directly to Joe or to Ross. But in terms of meetings,
But the other stuff,
what would,
how serious are we about the other stuff? You made it sound real serious. I get that. I take that stuff serious too, because it sets the stage for the tomorrows, right? And I'm not a real believer in shoveling stuff underneath the carpet.
Well, you don't start saving after your roof is leaking.
So that's, if, if we're gonna take that serious, that's gonna take some conversations and maybe some enrollment of other people from other committees. It's not just the finance committee. If we end up leading a drawn out strategic plan to run with some of this and do the due diligence that we have to do to find out all the possibilities of how we can move through. It's cash shortage to make things work over long term. No, it's
Ross?
There is a recommendation, I've said this, but I'll just say it for the record, recommendation that this committee could consider making to council, as I alluded to, with regard to advising council as to the importance of undertaking holistic financial sustainability exercise to move the village to a better footing.
And
so we've got,
any details to that on how you, we're putting that to council, but any ideas on how council? Or would we leave that to council to have?
Then council would simply need to direct
Would
staff
consider that as part of
provide a
the
report. And then in that report, we would set out here are various options, pros, the cons, here's the recommended best approach.
And we can also consider putting that into our the larger strategic plan.
Absolutely.
An element of our larger strategic plan,
Yes.
which we also desperately need to be working on as a council.
Okay,
So
be comfortable with that recommendation as a
it's like.
sort of an action item
Committee
from
members
this meeting?
like to move that recommendation.
Why do you make a resolution?
oh, are we ready for that?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure I could put it into words right now.
Ross, you want to help us?
Well, if you guys are comfortable with the spirit and intent of that language, Marina and I can just fine tune, massage that. If you want to give us that latitude, but it would effectively say that the committee recommends council consider undertaking a strategic approach to facilitating financial financial sustainability.
Yeah, long term, so, yeah.
I'd certainly like to see it before it was presented. So if you're volunteer to craft it.
So you either do that here on the fly and it gets right in front of council ASAP, or we can take it longer. I wouldn't sweat the details on the specific words. All the council needs to
No,
know
but it
is,
sets the tone and the vision of and the scope in some ways as to how you put that down, doesn't it? Or is it just a bare bones
It's pretty what you
feasibility?
just said, though. It's pretty fabulous.
Right now?
sure.
Okay. You don't have to. If you wanna call the meeting, then you're gonna do it anyway, that's all.
No,
I'm comfortable either way.
recommendation, that would be, I think it'd be well served.
I get a feeling it's gonna circle back to you in a lot of ways. Just with your expertise and, what you've gone through and your history.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, well. But I think there's Bruce and there's many others in the community that would be willing to roll up their sleeves, and whether it's working groups or
Bring a
come to a
framework,
meeting or,
bring a framework to doing this.
yeah. So if we can get that framework together.
Good.
So
Okay.
this sound is not particularly elegant, but the council, so the recommendation of the committee is that council consider pursuing an initiative to develop a technical plan to, what does that word say? to achieve long-term financial sustainability for the village.
Okay, sounds good to me.
Yeah,
Okay, someone want to move that motion? Okay, second,
David?
Okay, second,
All right.
David?
any discussion? No, all in favor?
Aye,
Opposed, carried,
perfect.
okay. All right, with that, any other items before we adjourn? No, okay, motion to adjourn,
So moved.
second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, carried. All right, thanks, that was good, enjoyed that.
Thanks, Ross. Good.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Ross.